Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me for episode 24 of Friday Book Bites. And today I am joined by my first ever international guest author, and that is Stephanie Parkyn. Hi Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, fantastic. All the way from New Zealand. As I said, you're my first international guest, so I'm very excited about that. And I'm also excited to discuss our topic today, which is fictionalising historical figures. Before we jump into that, Stephanie, I'm just going to put up the details of today's giveaway. I do a giveaway with every session that I do. And for anyone who leaves a comment or asks a question, whether that's here during this half-hour live stream, or if you're watching this back at a later time until lunchtime, Saturday, Sydney time, you will go into the draw to win a copy of Stephanie's book, Josephine's Garden. And there it is there. Beautiful, beautiful book. So we'll leave that open until, as I said, midday tomorrow, Sydney time. Thank you for joining me, Stephanie. And as I said, we're going to be talking about fictionalising historical figures. And in Josephine's Garden, you tell the story of Josephine, Napoleon's wife, who is a fairly well-known figure from our history. And I wanted to ask you first, what are the things that you have to consider when you are writing a fictional account of an historical figure?
Yes, you're right. With those characters that are quite well known, Napoleon and Josephine, there's a lot written about them for a start. So, a lot of people are aware of their past, and there is a responsibility, you feel, as the writer, sort of to get those things right as well. And a responsibility to the person themselves that you're not giving a wrong impression of them. But those are the constraints of the genre, and that's actually part of the challenge of it as well. It's like, if you're going to play a Rubik's Cube or something, you don't just take all the stickers off and move them onto the side. You've got the yeah, I've never actually managed to get a Rubik's Cube to work, but it's one of those things, the challenges of a game, of a puzzle. It does feel like a puzzle sometimes, that you are trying to make a story that you want to tell, and also illustrate these people's lives, and how they will reflect how you reflect them. And I like to think of probable and possible as being really important things to think about. As long as something is possible, or two characters could have been in the same place at the same time, then I will take a bit of license perhaps to put them together there. And timelines can be a really tricky thing, because like with Napoleon, he was at a number of wars and everyone knows, where exactly he was. There are timelines published. So I had to get that absolutely right. I couldn't have him be somewhere I wanted him to be for the story and it not be correct. So that was a challenge. And I did sort of fudge it slightly by using seasons sometimes rather than precise dates, if it was going to help me a little more in the story and the actual timelines. I guess I just want to stay true to a person's character as far as I can figure them out from the historical record. And I do actually really like that, trying to figure out who a person is from all the things that people have said about them.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's so much written about Napoleon and Josephine, and I wanted to find out how do you then balance the facts that we all know, or that we think we know, I should say that we think we know, and with the fiction that you wanted to incorporate into the story? How do you find that balance between fact and fiction?
It's I guess for me, I do want to get things correct if I deem that they're really important. But it's also about having fun and freedom to invent, and the story does have to be paramount to that, because there's other things that the reason that I'm writing the story is not just to tell you about the lives of these two people, and there are other characters in the story. It's not just that. There's another reason that I'm writing a book, or, you know, usually it's with my first book, it was about independence, and with this one it's more about security and women's choices, and the loss of identity through a marriage, and you know, with a very powerful figure like Napoleon and what he does to Josephine. That kind of thing can be reflected in many people's lives. So I guess I'm always trying to look at the issues that matter to us today, and those are the more important things to me, as long as I've got that storytelling truth that I want to be saying that this book is about. I might, you know, fudge a bit of the background stuff if I need to, or I'll, you know, use other characters to illustrate points or whatever. And I love it when you when all that sort of stuff comes together naturally, and you get the real true characters performing as they need to, or some event being very important. So there's a character, Martha, who actually has the same situation that Josephine is facing. And that was just pure chance. She was a real person, and this really did happen to her. I have chosen to put her in the story, but it happened to, she is the wife of the botanist, so that was true as well. And she has faced that horrible situation where you're, you know, you weren't able to give a child to your husband, and she lost everything. And that is basically the setup for Josephine's Garden, is what it would feel like. Josephine can't give Napoleon an heir, she's going to lose everything. So when sometimes those other side characters match what you're doing, it's a really good feeling that you sort of, woohoo!
I've got a follow-up question for that, but it kind of ties in with Tracy's question that she's left here in the comments. We'll see if we can meld the two together. Tracy says, it must take a bit more research if you're fictionalizing a real person for a story. How much research was involved in this, Stephanie?
Yeah, I do. I was fortunate, I guess, that people have written a lot about Napoleon and Josephine. Fortunate and not fortunate. So you can start by reading a lot about those characters, and sort of fill your subconscious with all of the world that they were living in by the biographies that have already been written about them, and by the first-person accounts of, you know, the tell-all stories of the ladies in waiting and the you know, the valet of Napoleon, and that it's a bit like today with the royals of today. Everybody's got a story, you know, of their own personal lives. So those things are available. So, and even the letters of Napoleon were available to read. So none of Josephine's writing herself, which gives you that in for more creativity, I guess, because not so much of what she has written has been preserved, but his letters to her have been. So you get a really good glean for how he must have been and how their relationship was and the things that were going on. So yeah, there is a lot of reading of that material, and a lot of checking and thinking, oh, where did I see that? I'm going to go back and find where I found that, because you don't always know where a certain fact is going to pop up and be important in the story as well. And you just think about it as you're writing and think, oh yeah, I need to find that again. Where was that? And yeah, so it does take a long time. My first book took me about 7 years of research and writing, and this one took me 4 years of research and writing, so getting a little bit quicker, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of research though. And I don't know if it's the same when you're doing something like this, but there's a kind of a rule of thumb in the writing world that says 90% of research does not end up on the page.
Yeah,
is that true?
that's true. Yeah, probably is. Like, you can spend hours and hours going down a line of something and reading, and it might just make one sentence, and later you'll think, oh, I don't really need that, and that sentence goes, you know. So there's many hours that, but it's interesting, you know. I think I was researching earlier this week speaking tubes in Victorian houses, and I just came across that reference, and I thought, what are they?
Yeah.
And then you start, sort of looking at this sort of before phones and everything. There was actual metal pipes in the walls of houses and people speaking down, and sometimes those little things can spark interesting ideas for scenes too, because when I was hearing that they were sort of like blowing in them and can you hear me and all that kind of stuff, I was just thinking of Skype and Zoom and all those things, and how we were always going, can you hear me yet? Can you see me? I can't see you.
Oh dear, I think I need one of those tubes in my own house to talk to the teenagers.
Yeah, that's right. We might go back to them.
Yeah. Just to tack into Tracy's question here, you mentioned Martha, and you have another wonderful female character in your book called Anne. Was it easier to write Martha and Anne's part of the story than Josephine's because they're lesser known figures, or was it harder?
Yeah, it does give you more freedom. So you can come at it without any of those preconceived ideas of what other people have had about those characters. I do think it probably is easier to make them more your own character, I would say. I still do refer to, sort of Josephine or, as my Josephine, because I admit that, it's going to be my version of her. It may not be everyone's idea of their version of her. And the same with the other characters. It's just that not so many people are aware of them. So they were real people, but we've got no idea what they were like, really. They're just lines of dates and, married here, this person. That's about all you know of them. So it is much more fun to invent those people because you do have that total freedom, I'd say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fiona's just commented that she needs one of those tubes in her house. Bring back the speaking tubes.
Yeah.
So what was it, the decision for you to write a fictionalized account of Josephine's life as opposed to writing a biography?
Yeah, I think for me it is just more fun to do fiction, and you have the ability to play and invent scenes. And like when I read about Napoleon's horrid sisters, how mean they were to Josephine, it just sparks that idea of, how they can meet and how horrible they could be to each other. So, or to her. So, that's the fun thing with, I don't know that scene that I invented happened. It's a possibility because they were so cruel to her, and people have commented on those things, but not those precise words or that precise location or any of that. That's total my invention, but that's the fun of being able to do a fictionalized account, because I guess the reader will play along with you, that the reason they want to read it as a story and as if they are imagining how this person could actually have been. And if I'm true to what I think her character is, then I can kind of play like that, because I think, we want to know as if we're watching it happen, or as if we're her, or as if we're one of the other characters. We don't just want a bullet point, biography necessarily. Then we would read a historian's account and you'd get all the different viewpoints on that. And I guess I have to make a decision about what I think she should be, or and just run with that and hope that readers appreciate being brought along in that world. And I think it plays into that. I'm wanting to say something else. It's not just an account of her life. That's not what I think the main point of the novel is. It's more about, all the things. How would it feel if everything you'd built up, this amazing garden and everything you were going to lose because you couldn't give a child to your partner? Or why do people stay with partners or jobs that are not good for them, really? Those sorts of things are more important than just the facts of her life. Yeah.
And I guess that's the difference, isn't it, between a biography and a fictionalized account. A biography is very much the this happened, this happened, this happened, dates, places, names, whereas you're filling in all of those beautiful gaps that actually make up a life,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Each one of us, we're more than our names and our dates and who we met and when we met them. There's so much more to a life than that. How is it that you fill in those gaps, to make the life of Josephine rather than the facts of Josephine?
Yeah. I guess that's where the imagination part of it comes in, and you really just have to let fly a bit there and let go of that worry that you're not getting it necessarily perfectly right. If basically you can't have been there at that time to have been looking over the shoulder when she's in a private discussion with Napoleon or something, but neither was anyone else. So
That's true. That's true.
and other people's accounts can also be not true, or their own personal version, and even memoir, if it was her account of her life, would it necessarily be as true to somebody else's watching on and seeing what they thought? So, there's lots of loose areas like that anyway. And yeah, I think it's imagination. It's kind of just throwing yourself, what would it be like for you? I remember someone saying something like, well, even as everybody stubs their toes, so there's things that we have in our lives that could fall over into a historical thing too, and just filling your subconscious with the world that it could be as well, if that's looking at historical artworks of the time, and just giving your brain a little jolt of all the possible, or if it's watching a period drama from the time or something. So something you might see in that might spark an idea for a scene and an interaction. I think that's how I would generally tend to fill the gaps if I don't really know what happened between them.
And I guess that's where the research becomes really important. If the 90% that doesn't end up on the page is still informing you as the author in terms of how they would behave and how they would react, and that's helps fill in those gaps, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. It's still there in the background, and you might bring it back out. It might come back in a later edit if you cross it out, or yeah. But it is amazing how much time you can spend checking in one small fact or one small line, and you get led away on a certain journey into all this background information about what Italian prostitutes wore or whatever.
Yeah. We've got a question here from Mary Lou. Mary Lou would like to know, what was it about Josephine that first attracted you to her story?
Yeah, well, actually, I came sideways to her story because the botanist and gardener that are in this story were the characters that featured in my first book, Into the World. And they were on the ship that a woman had disguised herself on, and she meets them. She disguised herself as a man and went around the world, and that was based on a true story. And at the end of that story, the botanist and the gardener get arrested, and you don't really know what happens to them afterwards. So I just wanted to find out what happened to them. So I followed that line and discovered that Felix, the gardener, becomes the chief gardener for Josephine. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. This is a lead into the next phase of France's history. And it was interesting to find out that, I guess, what was I going to say? I've lost them.
How did we get to Josephine?
Just that next phase. And she was so interested in these plants that had come from around the world, and that sort of led me to this sort of, well, I've got these characters, I can bring them all together again, and we can see where it goes next for these characters, and and I became interested in Josephine and Napoleon because I thought, well, I think this is a love story, isn't it? That's all I'd heard of them. That was a great love story. And as I started to read more into it, I realized this is a much more complex love story than this. This is a story of dependence, and he was treating her quite badly by the end, and lots of things started to remind me of sort of a domestic abuse situation. So I thought, well, there's a lot more here than just a love story, and that's what then hooked me into it.
Mm-hmm. Tracy's made a comment which refers back to what you were saying about that all of Napoleon's letters to Josephine were preserved, but not much of Josephine's own writing was preserved. And Tracy says that not having much of Josephine's personal accounts is very telling of women's places in society and history. Is that how you would see that as well?
Yeah, that's right. And that's what I was attracted to with my first novel too, because it was also based on a true woman's account, and there was nothing of her writings either. And, there's so many of those gaps where that side of a woman's side of history hasn't been recorded. And in fact, in France, they weren't even teaching women the same type of language, which I found really interesting. So the spelling was different. They were taught different. They were taught a phonetic type spelling that would be good enough for, shopping lists or whatever, but they couldn't appear on the same footing if they wanted to write intellectually as men. So that might have limited a lot of women from leaving their records of their lives as well, or there just wasn't the opportunity, it's very sad in that regard. I did get to include Olympe de Gouges in my first novel, and she actually features through in the one I'm writing now as well. And she was a playwright at the time of the French Revolution and became very politically involved. And I wanted to connect her to my main character so I could tell the story of the revolution from a woman's perspective as well. And she is fortunately someone whose writings were, preserved. But there's a lot of that in history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favourite books of all time is called The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, and it's the story of one of the daughters of Joseph the sisters of Joseph in the Bible. And the prologue says, we've been lost to each other. The stories fell to the men, and my story and my mother's stories have not been told. And I think that's an important thing that people like yourself are doing. You're bringing these stories from these women in history into the light that we don't normally see them, because history has always been told by men.
Yeah, that's right. It does feel like a privilege to do that as well, to make a bit of a contribution in that regard, to even if you don't get it precisely right as Josephine would have liked me to have presented her. There is also their artworks. At least wealthy women were able to get portraits done of themselves. And I actually used that a lot with Josephine, because I think she was speaking to us through those portraits, the things that she was placing around her. And, there's some where she's placed herself with the garden behind and the glass houses, and her hand resting on a notebook, she was telling us she was very interested in being a gardener and was knowledgeable about it, whereas she has been sort of maligned over the years as being just this party girl, sort of prostitute, and maybe known for her roses and the growing of those plants, but not all of the massive history stuff that she was doing. So I did feel it was important to bring out that there's more to her. She knew the Latin names of all these plants, and, she wasn't just in it for the pretty side of things.
Yeah. Cassie's left us a comment that says, giving voice to women of the past is so vital. And that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Mm.
And just to answer Cheryl's question, I think somebody's answered it in the comments for her. Cheryl, Josephine's Garden and all of Stephanie's novels are historical fiction. Fiona has also read The Red Tent twice and loved it. Yeah, it's one of my favorites of all time. It's behind me, but I don't want to, do the whole rude thing and turn my but it's on my
yeah, I'll look that up. Yeah, because that's really interesting as well. I think it was one of those Silence of the Girls or something. It has similar sort of sentiments that, these women's stories were not going to be kept for posterity. Yeah.
So with that in mind, and you mentioned this at the very beginning of our talk, the responsibility that you feel when you're writing this, how important was it for you to really get a sense of the voice of Josephine in order to tell her story, when you know that that women's stories don't typically get told from history? How did you cope with that responsibility?
Because she is such a complex person and has had such a complex past too. It's sort of it was kind of coming at it through figuring out what was going to be her most important driving factor. And I came to realize that it was probably security. And she was going to be motivated most by a sense of security because she had lost her home many times in her past. So that's how I sort of came to representing her. And then I just tried to make those decisions that I thought, there is some stuff where she comes across as quite flawed as well. We wouldn't, necessarily, go along with all her decisions. And I think it was important to show those as well. That,
well, that makes her real.
Yeah, that's right. And, that it may not be the decision you would have made, but, that was the time and that's what she did. So, so just trying to show her as honestly as I could figure out her to be, and, and have a sense of just what would that feel like to be her, and have those decisions to make, to make sure it didn't come across too judgmental or, that sort of thing as well. Yeah. I've had difficulty with what she does with her with her daughter, basically, and lines them up to be married with one of Napoleon's awful brothers. So that took me a while to work through all that and figure out what were her motivations, why she would have done that, and give justice to her side of the story.
What was the most surprising thing that you learnt in your research, or the most interesting thing?
There were quirky little things that I didn't know about that time of history with, say, the French Revolution, when they changed the entire calendar and even the length of the week. So it was no longer 7 days week, it was 10-day long week, and they had all different names for the weeks and the weekends and months and the days of the month. And it must have been a complete, mind-boggling change. And the other weird little thing that I discovered with Napoleon, so he was a total micromanager of everything, but highly intelligent man as well, even for all his wars and horribleness that went on. He instituted the system we have today, which is odd numbers on one side of the street and even numbers on the other, so that you can find where people are. And it's a really, I think it was a schmozzle before that, but something simple like that has come out of his planning of every little minor detail of things. Yeah. So I learned heaps through every sort of story like this, because I never did any history at school. So I come to it pretty much not knowing anything about the French Revolution or for the first book. And this one was, how they put a military dictator into power so soon after the French Revolution. Yeah. So it's interesting for me because I didn't don't really know much about those things, and I just learn heaps as I'm doing the writing.
Did you think that was perhaps an advantage, that you came into it with completely fresh eyes?
Yeah, maybe. It does mean I'm probably more influenced by whatever books that I do read about those things. But I mean, we're so fortunate with the internet that we can Google lots of information, and we can get first-hand accounts and journals of my explorers for the first novel. And, you know, there is so much available, and so much, you know, sort of, you know, both sides of the story. So you don't feel that you're just giving only a one-sided view. Yeah, so I guess it maybe helps to have me look at it like I'm a complete nobody to it as well, you know, like a complete newbie. Then it maybe helps for other people that are also not familiar with the history. It could mean that I get stuff wrong that other people would pick up quicker. I don't know. Fortunately, nobody's emailed me and told me that I've got anything major wrong so far. And I have had
they would have you.
Yeah, they probably would have. I had a nice one from a student in Ireland who was studying French history and the revolutions and stuff, and she said, "Oh, thank you. It's, you know, helped me to get through my studies." So hopefully it's put her on the right track.
You'll be quoted in her thesis.
Yeah.
Fiona has actually been to Josephine's garden last year, back when we were allowed to travel, and she said it was absolutely beautiful and very different to most of the tourist places in France. Did you get to go there to do some of your research?
I did too. Malmaison house is preserved like a museum, so you can go in and you can see her rooms, and you can see well, the whole house, how it's set out, the layout, the room, Napoleon's study, the bedrooms. So that's amazing resource, and then it immediately fills your mind, and you can keep that in mind for the writing. As you're picturing scenes, and also use tiny details that you would like. They had like her hair combs, and they had a few little things like that, and slippers, and, you know, you just feel like you know the person that little bit more when you see those very personal items of, you know, sort of perfume or whatever that you can use in the story or not, but you do feel like you're a little closer to them. And unfortunately most of those gardens have been chopped in now, because it was about 300 acres and it's not so much anymore. So a lot of the garden stuff I've done has come from imagination, basically, apart from seeing the layout, sort of rough layout. But the house definitely. And I was very fortunate. I did a residency in a chateau, so I got to have 2 weeks and working and living in this chateau. So I got to pretend I was like a Josephine, or, you know, in that world.
Were you swanning around the chateau pretending you were Josephine?
Yes, that's right. Sweeping up and down the hallways. Yeah.
That's excellent. I've got one last question for you, and then we'll pop up some details of how people can reach you. And if anyone's got any other questions, pop them through in the comments now. The 3 women that feature in this book, Anne, Martha, and Josephine, did you have a favourite?
Oh, I did, actually. I loved writing Martha because she has such a difficult time of it. She is married to the very awkward and very emotionally distant Labeladier, and he drives her pretty much nuts. So I had her arc of being driven to a very low point before she comes back and has a bit of a triumph. So I liked writing her. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm going to pop up the details of where you can find Stephanie online, and there's her first book, Into the World, which she has alluded to a few times during today's talk. While I leave that there, Stephanie, what is next for you?
I'm writing the story of in Into the World. woman character gives up her baby to go around the world, and I'm writing the story of the boy who she gives up. So he is now an older character. He's this traveling storyteller, and it's all about how he is coming to terms or not with having been abandoned, and hopefully finding his mother again. So yeah, it's more about their story.
Excellent. So there is a link between these books, but it's not a series as such, is it?
No, that's right. So I've just continued with some of the characters, and this one will be a totally standalone story, and it's actually based a lot in Germany and Italy, which were areas that were overtaken by Napoleon. So I'm looking at how Napoleon's influence on those places, like he was banning in Venice Carnevale, and he banned all their art forms and stuff like that. And these guys are storytellers. So that sort of true history plays into what I can, sort of show of what the background of the bigger sort of historical events, and also personally what that's like for people to live in that situation. And they are going to be kind of my characters trying to find where is home for them. They've lived in these sorts of colonized places. So it's been really fun to write too, because it's all stuff I didn't know about. It's the history of theatre, the history of storytelling. At the time of the Grimm's fairy tales are being written and turned into books, and these guys are traveling storytellers, so they're losing their income and their livelihood, and Napoleon's empire is suddenly shrinking. The French storytellers traveling freely in these colonized places that are now turfing them out. So there's lots of conflict, and which is great when it's a true historical thing and I can make it fit for the story.
Excellent. Cindy has said that it is a brilliant book, and that it keeps coming back to her in thought. And that's one of the things about a book, when it touches you and you keep thinking about it afterward. That's the part of a really good story, isn't it?
I know, and you just really want to go back to some of those characters too when you've read about, and you just sort of think about them. What are they doing now? And that sort of thing.
Yeah. And Leanne has also mentioned that she loved Josephine's garden. So I am going to wrap up there and let you get back to your life, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Don't forget, we do have a copy of Josephine's garden up for grabs. It doesn't matter if you haven't joined us for the live stream. If you are watching this back, you can leave a comment, and you can also ask questions. Stephanie and I can go back into those comments at a later date if there's a question there that we've missed, and we can answer them there. Again, thank you so much. When should we expect the new book?
December 2021, so it'll be a whole year from now. Yeah,
Christmas next year.
Yeah. All going well.
Well, things can be a bit funny at the moment, can't they? And I know publishing schedules are a little bit wonky. And Mary Lou is saying thank you for the chat. And
thank you. Thanks, Mary Lou.
So is Darlene. And there you go. I've introduced Darlene to a new author. And I would definitely recommend this. I remember the first page got me. Just the lyrical writing that was there was just was really brilliant. So that was so nice to discover. Leanne says thank you, and Cassie also saying thank you. And Cheryl's another new reader for you as well. There you go.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, Sandy, for including me in your chat of your series of all these beautiful authors. And it's lovely to feel part of a writing community, I think, because
it's been a bit of a tough year, and it's one of the reasons that I put this series together was not only to connect authors with each other, and it's been fantastic for me to get to talk to all of these wonderful authors, but also for readers. Just to pop in at lunchtime and have a bit of a chat about the thing we love most, which is books, and just feel that little bit of connection that we're missing at the moment, I think.
Yeah, that's right, because you can't get out and talk to people, and sometimes we're living in very far spread places, so it's good. to have this.
Well, hopefully next year you'll be able to tour over here and we can meet each other in person. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Until then, we'll all stay connected online. And thank you again for
Yeah.
joining me, Stephanie. And I'll see everybody again next week.
Thank you.
Thanks.